Tensura is a work in which Rimuru Tempest, surrounded by ultra-powerful characters such as his high officers, embodies a feeling of absolute stress-free comfort. The strongest almost always end up joining his side, and the story radiates benevolence and harmonious growth. It is precisely this reassuring vibe that gives the series its unique charm. However, in the mobile game That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, Isekai Memories, there exists a fully destructive alternate world that shatters this idyllic image. A timeline in which Rimuru falls into darkness, a true descent into obscurity. This alternative scenario is an absolute nightmare, and in this video we will dive into the origins of that fall, before exploring what would happen if Rimuru remained truly corrupted until the very end. And what makes this trajectory even more chilling is that it does not come out of nowhere. This timeline is not a simple speculation or a fan delusion. It is part of the official roots of the series. An alternative scenario designed and validated under the direct supervision of the author himself, conceived as a genuine possibility within the Tensura multiverse. In other words, this corrupted Rimuru is not a gratuitous invention, but one of the paths he could genuinely have taken if certain choices, certain losses, or certain emotions had prevailed. And that is precisely what makes this fall so disturbing. Those who criticize Tensura sit down and savor this video as it deserves. Share it with everyone, fans and haters alike, especially the haters. They need to watch this to understand that Tensura is an incredible story. I'm counting on you. We will compare this point by point with the canonical storyline of the light novel and the manga, examining the divergences, the tragic consequences, and even engaging in a bit of speculative analysis to make the atmosphere even more tangible. Feel free to tell me in the comments which episode of this dark scenario in Maoryu is your favorite, especially the one involving the alternative storyline, or any other moment that left a strong impression on you. The assault on Tempest. This alternative branch takes place precisely during the Pharma's Kingdom conspiracy and the attack led by Hinata Sakaguchi, leader of the Crusaders, in the main storyline. In the original story, Rimuru confronts Hinata, but he cannot defeat her, while still avoiding total defeat. Why? Because the moment the Holy Field is activated, Great Sage instantly detects the mortal danger. Rimuru then transfers his main slime body to a safe location and leaves behind a physical clone to face Hinata. It is this clever stratagem that allows him to survive and return stronger than ever. But in this alternative timeline, Rimuru does not have that moment of enlightenment. He charges headfirst into direct combat against Hinata without taking any precaution. The result? A total and overwhelming defeat. His body is completely annihilated, and it takes him 3 long years to fully regenerate, thanks to his extra skill Ultra Speed regeneration. During those 3 years of absolute void, what happens to Tempest? That is where the nightmare truly begins. Most of the inhabitants, including Rimuru's loyal lieutenants such as Benimaru, Shuna, Shiona, Hakuru, Gobta, Gobuzo, and many others, perish one after another. We witness horrifying scenes in which humans treat monsters like mere slaves, abusing them, slaughtering them mercilessly. It is an inverted world, a dystopian nightmare where the nation Rimuru built with love crumbles into dust. Seeing how fragile Tempest is without its central leader delivers a visceral shock. Yet even in the main storyline, this vulnerability is already foreshadowed. When Rimuru is fully engaged in his duel against Hinata and communication is severed, the council chamber plunges into total panic. Benimaru, the great commander-in-chief, the embodiment of a samurai's composure and restraint, turns pale in an instant. Rimuru's absence causes a dramatic collapse in morale and overall effectiveness. Without him, everything falls apart like a house of cards. Even worse, without Rimuru's return, Shiona remains permanently dead, and Gobuzo, along with the hundreds of other victims of the Pharma's attack, never come back. No resurrection, no hope. It is a definitive loss, an eternal mourning that weighs heavily on the survivors. And then there is Hakuro. In the main story, he is gravely injured during his battle against the otherworlder Kiyoya Tachibana of Pharmas, suffering an attack with a spatial attribute. Shuna diagnoses that without Rimuru's intervention using gluttony to remove the cause, Hakuro can only rely on slow natural healing or temporary stabilization. In this scenario without Rimuru, Hakuro would most likely not have held on, and would eventually die as well from his injuries. And let us not forget the fundamental rule that Rimuru had imposed on his subordinates: do not harm humans. This was not a magical constraint engraved into a contract, just a verbal promise. a moral directive. Technically, they could break it without any physical or magical backlash. Yet in the main storyline, even in the face of invasion, they restrain themselves greatly. And that restraint is precisely what leads to Hakuro's defeat against Kyoya. In the spin-off Trinity, we see Gobumon kill a human and do everything in his power to hide it from Rimuru. This shows just how colossal Rimuru's mere words are in terms of influence over his subordinates. Without him to embody that will, that restraint crumbles, and chaos takes hold. In short, Rimuru's prolonged absence alone is enough to send everything plunging into the abyss. Now let us return to this alternative timeline to see what happens next. Only a handful of survivors manage to escape. Sui and Soka with the Shadow Ninjas, Trainee and the three Dryad Sisters, the High Orcs, the Hobgoblins, the Lizardmen Chief Abiru, and even his son Gabiru, as well as the emissaries sent to Eurazania, the traveling merchants, an infinitesimal handful. Why these specific groups? Because they were on missions outside the holy field surrounding Tempest. Sui and his ninjas conducting infiltration and reconnaissance, the orcs working on road construction, the hobgoblins out on patrol and hunting duties. In doing so, they escape the devastating effects of the holy field. These survivors attempt a desperate counterattack against the soldiers of Farmus and the Holy Knights. But they are crushed without mercy. The numerical superiority is overwhelming. Farmus deploys thousands of soldiers, supported by the powerful Temple Knights under Gran Bel Rosso. Against such force, even the most elite survivors stand no chance. Add to that the three otherworlders who survived, but above all, the most fearsome forces of the Farmus Kingdom, the kingdom's supreme magician, the royal mage Raisin, as well as the Holy Knights, elite warriors where each individual surpasses A rank. And if we imagine the worst, if even the legendary figures known as the 10 Great Saints, beings on a level comparable to an unawakened demon lord, were to join the battle, then resistance would simply be impossible, whether the holy field were deployed or not. The 10 Great Saints, as a reminder, are entities who stand roughly on the same level as a demon lord prior to full awakening. At this point in the story, even Benimaru, who would undoubtedly be the strongest subordinate after Rimuru, admitted himself that he could not defeat the demon lord Carrion. And in this scenario, Rimuru has not yet undergone his own evolution into a demon lord, he has not distributed gifts, and his high officers have not benefited from the evolutions tied to that process. Their power, therefore, remains limited compared to what they will eventually become. Worse still, a secret pact was concluded between the demon lord Clayman and the king of Farmus. The territory where Tempest once stood was requisitioned for military purposes and transformed into a strategic zone. And through Clayman's curse, Rimuru's companions were reduced to slavery, turned into Clayman's puppets. Benimaru and the others were explicitly declared dead through Sui's own testimony, which makes their survival extremely unlikely. Among the possible slaves still alive, those whose deaths or survival are neither confirmed nor denied, we may consider figures such as Gerudo of the High Orcs, or Gobuemon, for example. Faced with this absolute disaster, Vester, the former minister of the armed nation of Dwargon, pleaded with King Gazel to intervene and formally protest against the kingdom of Farmus. However, Gazel, taking into account the equality of status with a demon lord such as Clayman, refused to escalate matters into open hostility. The situation reached a deadlock. To start a war, a legitimate and irrefutable cause is required. And above all, with Rimuru unreachable and presumed dead or missing, it is out of the question to plunge Dwargon into such a hell without concrete proof. And then there is the question burning on everyone's lips. Where is Milim Nava, one of the oldest and most powerful demon lords? In the main story, Milim would have detected Clayman's scheme from the very beginning and pretended to be under his control in order to counter him more effectively. Faced with such a grave threat to her precious friend Rimuru and to Tempest, she would have moved heaven and earth without hesitation. Clayman, the Holy Knights, Farmus, nothing would have been able to stop her. Yet in this alternative timeline, Milim shows absolutely no sign of intervention. If we set aside narrative, constraints such as game pacing or scenario choices, the logically possible explanations are reduced to a few hypotheses. The Demon Lord Guy Crimson, acting as the mediator tasked with preserving the balance of the world, stopped her outright. Upon learning of the injustice that had occurred, Milim completely lost control in a full stampede, but Guy and the others forcibly restrained her. The shock of Rimuru's death plunged her into such deep despair that she no longer had any motivation to act. Among these possibilities, the third appears the most plausible by elimination. After all, even if Guy and the others managed to stop her, there would have been catastrophic consequences for the battlefield and the surrounding lands. Clayman concluded a pact with the King of Pharmus, which implies that he is still alive and in a position of power. Whereas if Milim had acted, Clayman would almost certainly have been eliminated on the spot. Guy Crimson would not necessarily have moved just to protect Clayman alone, but if Milim was simply paralyzed by despair over the loss of Rimuru, everything makes sense. It is a chilling possibility. The total absence of Rimuru is enough to extinguish even Milim's destructive rage, but you surely have your own hypotheses as well regarding the reason that led Milim to not intervene. Feel free to share your theories in the comments. Rimuru's descent into darkness. Faced with this apocalyptic situation, Sui and the few remaining survivors ask Rimuru what they should do from this point onward. For them, these events date back 3 years, but for Rimuru, who has only just finished regenerating, it is news that hits him like a sledgehammer, a nightmarish reality he is hearing for the very first time. He tries to keep a cool head, to process the horror, but the pain is too great. For the first time, he lets his weakness slip, thinking that this is the moment when even he has the right to break down. I don't care who it is, a demon, anyone, someone, please help me. It is at that exact moment that the primordial Noir reacts. A sinister and familiar laugh echoes, "Kufu-fu-fu, what a nostalgic scent, oh great benefactor. I heard your cry for help, and here I am, rushing to your side." Rimuru is stunned. Noir's appearance is exactly the same as in the main story, filled with that elegant arrogance and absolute loyalty. Yet Rimuru has drawn no magic circle, performed no summoning ritual whatsoever. The demon has simply appeared, as if he had always been there, watching and waiting. This may seem like pure Deus Ex Machina, but it is not. Even in the main story, Noir was already observing Rimuru from the demon world through indirect connections, intrigued by his existence. And contrary to popular belief, demons do not always require a magic circle or a formal ritual to manifest in this world. The spin-off proves this. Violet traveled to the Cardinal World on a whim after hearing Noir boast, and took the form of a cat to conserve her energy. John regularly bombards Leon's country with large-scale destructive spells without physically moving there each time. For them, entering the material world is not particularly difficult. Rimuru knows perfectly well that negotiating with a demon without offering a reward is risky, borderline suicidal. But at this stage, he has nothing left to lose. Finding the situation ironic, almost amusing in its absurdity, he blurts out without restraint, "In that case, make yourself useful to me." He begs Noir with all his strength, asking him for a way to escape this desperate situation, the worst scenario imaginable. Noir replies in his usual honeyed and calculating tone, "If you lend an ear to the voices of the souls who revere you, the answer will reveal itself naturally, will it not?" At those words, Great Sage reacts instantly and poses the crucial question. Do you wish to absorb the resentment and souls of the monsters connected to your spiritual lineage in order to evolve into a true demon lord? Rimuru, his heart heavy but his resolve firm, accepts without hesitation. Thus is born Demon Lord Rimuru. Noir, more excited than ever, begins directing the scene on his own initiative, overflowing with energy, almost comical in his eagerness. Rimuru, inwardly perplexed by this behavior, bears witness to his own awakening as a newly born demon lord. The evolution brings about spectacular transformations, not only for Rimuru himself, but also for all his surviving companions. Their appearances change drastically, imbued with a dark and menacing aura. Rimuru, he now bears 2 demon horns, a face marked with sinister patterns, and a presence that inspires fearful reverence. Sui, he evolves into an even more ominous version of himself, with malevolent horns and a deep, threatening voice. Trainee and her dryad sisters. They are adorned with black vines and light, dark garments, wrapped in a diabolical aura that sends chills down the spine. Gabiru, his aura becomes that of an evil dragon. Every trace of his exuberant and cheerful nature fades away, replaced by predatory coldness. Ranga, he transforms into a wolf of absolute jet-black darkness, the very embodiment of night and terror. Each evolution reflects profound darkness, a slide toward absolute evil. And this is hardly surprising. Monster evolution often incorporates the individual's deepest desires, the wishes of the one who names them, or the intentions of their master. Here, Rimuru's rage, despair, and thirst for vengeance are fully expressed. It should be noted that Trainee and the Dryads were not officially Rimuru's subordinates. Trainee herself explains that, as members of the Great Alliance, they were recognized by Rimuru as privileged allies. It was this recognition that placed them, in a sense, at the very lowest tier of his subordinates, allowing them to benefit from the collective evolution. The overall design of this Dark Demon Lord Rimuru strongly emphasizes Oni elements: the horns, the facial markings, and the visible influence of Benimaru and Shuna in his aesthetics. It is as if the ogre aspect of his closest lieutenants has fused with his own corrupted essence. Once the evolution is complete, Rimuru asks Noir about the reward. The primordial demon simply replies, "Being of use to you is more than sufficient for me." At that moment, Noir exists in a non-incarnated spiritual body. He cannot remain in this world for long without risking being forced back into the demon world. Grateful, Rimuru decides to offer him a vessel worthy of his existence and gives him a name, Diablo. The name is exactly the same as in the main story. However, upon closer inspection, the difference in tone is striking. In the original story, Rimuru chooses Diablo, after hesitating between several supercar-inspired names, finding it cool and ironic. Here, the choice is made without that lightheartedness. There is even a hint of bitter irony, almost a form of mockery toward the demon himself. Rimuru's playful and mischievous side has clearly faded, replaced by a cold, pragmatic demeanor. With Diablo now at his side, Rimuru and his loyal followers launch the counteroffensive. They reclaim Tempest in record time, crushing the occupying forces. Then, fully embracing his status as a demon lord, Rimuru initiates an open war against humanity. From that point onward, the alternative scenario concludes rapidly. Veldora, once resurrected, joins their ranks. The humans who dared to lay hands on the nation of monsters bitterly regret their folly. Rimuru, in order to protect the paradise he built, even if it is now stained with blood, is prepared to commit any atrocity without the slightest remorse. Thus is born the strongest and cruelest of demon lords, the Rimuru of Darkness. He bears without regret the title of the strongest and most malevolent demon lord. This is the entirety of this alternative scenario in Maoryu. It lasts only about 20 minutes in-game, which leaves many shadows and unanswered questions. Yet paradoxically, it is precisely this ambiguity that leaves the door wide open to imagination and speculation. As a reminder, this alternative branch is unlocked in Chapter 13, Episode 11, The Bad End Obtained by Losing the Key Battle. One cannot help but think, I absolutely do not want to see this world. And yet, in terms of internal logic, it was a very real possibility. Chloe, through the timelines she has observed, saw only futures in which Rimuru died. This Dark Rimuru may therefore be just one of countless alternative variants. When we think about it, the fact that our main world, the one in which Rimuru survives thanks to an incredible accumulation of miracles, truly exists makes the canonical story all the more precious and emotionally powerful. That said, even with the elements already explained, this dark scenario still raises a great many questions. Here are the most pressing points we will break down next. The Dark Rimuru awakened as a demon lord by absorbing souls filled with resentment. Why were his companions, unlike Cheyenne and the others in the main story, unable to be resurrected? Why did Rimuru take 3 full years to return to life? Who would win in a duel, Dark Rimuru or Rimuru of the main storyline? What future awaits a world where Rimuru has become an evil demon lord? What is the ultimate end of this Dark Rimuru? Let us begin with the first point: awakening as a demon lord through souls of resentment. Normally, in order to become an awakened demon lord, a monster classified as a demon lord seed must perform the Harvest Festival, a ritual that requires the absorption of at least 10,000 human souls. In the main story, Rimuru reaches this state after annihilating approximately 20,000 coalition soldiers during the invasion of Tempest, using their souls to trigger his evolution. We also know that Clayman, during Walpurgis, simulated a pseudo-awakening, an irregular and temporary method, fundamentally different from a true awakening. Clayman's pseudo-awakening was nothing more than a pale imitation, not comparable to the authentic and permanent evolution of Dark Rimuru. So how was Rimuru able to bypass the requirement of 10,000 human souls? This is precisely where the key to this divergence lies. Instead of pure human souls, he absorbed the resentment and accumulated souls of the monsters of Tempest, those who perished in horror, saturated with hatred toward humans. This mass of negative energy, concentrated and visceral, served as a sufficient substitute to force the awakening. And to go even further, Noir himself subtly guided Rimuru toward this path of darkness. Let us recall his exact words. He suggested listening to the voices of souls, stating that the answer would naturally emerge from there. When one reflects on it, even in the main story, it was already Great Sage, then Raphael, and later Ciel, who pushed Rimuru to accomplish feats that were utterly insane. Not only his awakening as a demon lord, but also his evolution into an ultimate skill, the execution of the secret resurrection arcane, and many other acts that left everyone speechless. Even in a world where no one truly dies permanently, Great Sage never hesitated to propose extreme solutions, often judged reckless or insane by those around her. It is therefore entirely logical to think that, in this alternative timeline, Great Sage simply followed Rimuru's deepest will to the letter at that precise moment. Consumed by vengeance and resentment, he wanted to punish, to destroy, to make others pay. Great Sage, faithful to her role as an absolute assistant, interpreted this rage as a clear directive and traced the most efficient path to achieve it, absorbing the hatred-filled souls of the massacred monsters in order to bypass the classical conditions and force an awakening as a demon lord. It was most likely she, once again, who made this abnormal evolution possible, through resentment rather than through the traditional 10,000 human souls. Can the companions be resurrected in this broken world? The answer, unfortunately, is no. In the scenario of Rimuru the Destroyer, the resurrection of his companions appears impossible for several cumulative reasons. Rimuru never learned of Milim's legend through Ellen. In the main story, it was this discussion that taught him that an awakened demon lord could potentially bring back the dead. Here, 3 years passed without any outside contact. It is highly unlikely that Ellen and the others ever came to Tempest amid such chaos. The time elapsed is fatal. 3 full years have passed since the massacres. Even if the Holy Field may have preserved certain bodies or souls temporarily, it is extremely unlikely that it was actively maintained over such a vast area for 3 entire years. Souls naturally disperse over time without sustained magical preservation. The physical bodies are gone. The invaders had no reason to treat the remains with respect. They most likely burned them, desecrated them, or simply left them to rot. As for the remaining inhabitants, they are mentally controlled or enslaved, incapable of offering any help. In the main story, it was Raphael who executed the secret arcane of resurrection of the dead, even though in this alternative version, Veldora was indeed released from his seal just like in the main storyline, which implies that Rimuru most likely acquired an ultimate skill equivalent to or close to Raphael. There is no guarantee that it is exactly the same evolved entity. The evolution into Raphael depended heavily on Rimuru's visceral desire to save Xian and the others. Here, dominated by hatred and destruction, that same desire no longer exists in the same form. Furthermore, the success of the resurrection arcane in the main story relied largely on the fervent desire of the demons summoned together with Diablo. In this alternative version, both the material conditions and the emotional conditions are sorely lacking to reproduce such a miracle. In short, too many pieces of the puzzle are missing for resurrection to be conceivable. Rimuru the Destroyer versus main Rimuru. Who wins? To make a serious comparison, we must first list what is known about each of their abilities, because the specifications of Dark Rimuru remain incomplete. Abilities exclusive to the alternative Rimuru the Destroyer Megiddo Infernus, a technique of absolute devastating power, which the main Rimuru would most likely have sealed for safety reasons. Here, having abandoned all restraint, he uses it without limitation. It is clearly his most terrifying offensive trump card in this scenario. Abilities exclusive to the main Rimuru Uriel, built upon the foundation of infinite prison, strengthened by soul bonds with subordinates, and evolved into an ultimate skill. In this alternative version, with so few surviving subordinates and spiritual links shattered by mass death, Uriel most likely does not exist. Without Uriel, it becomes impossible to later reach Shub-Niggurath, the ultimate skill created by Ciel, the evolution from Raphael into Ciel. In the main story, this was purely the result of Rimuru's whim, naming his skill with a name that triggered exponential growth. A Rimuru consumed by destruction would most likely never have had such a lighthearted and creative idea. Space-time domination, including time stop. This is an absolute game changer. In the later arcs of the main story, such as battles against beings like Michael, Dagruel, and Feldway, Time Stop is used by the strongest entities. Without it, Dark Rimuru would be vulnerable to Guy Crimson should he decide to intervene to halt excessive destruction of the world. Beyond skills, a colossal gap. One of the greatest handicaps of Dark Rimuru is the absence of Kurobi, the blacksmith of Tempest. In the main story, Kurobi forges the demonic draconic blade, whose existence value reaches 2.28 million. This weapon becomes one of Rimuru's major assets in extremely high-level battles. In this alternative timeline, with Tempest devastated for 3 years, Kurobi died among the first victims, or was enslaved, and this legendary blade was never created. Provisional verdict. At the very beginning of his dark reign, armed with Megiddo Infernus and raw, unrestrained rage, corrupted Rimuru could dominate in a direct and immediate confrontation. However, as time goes on, canonical Rimuru, with his complete ultimate skills, Uriel, Ciel, space-time domination, Shub Niggurath, Kurobi's blade, countless allies, and a global network, creates an insurmountable gap. In the later phases of the story, Dark Rimuru would most likely be overtaken. In this alternative timeline, Kurobi and the other high-level craftsmen appear to have perished among the earliest victims, meaning that not only does the legendary draconic sword not exist, but the entire technological and artisanal superiority of Tempest is crippled. Without this weapon, whose existence value reaches 2.228 million and which incorporates draconic factors, corrupted Rimuru finds himself severely disadvantaged in terms of equipment and pure offensive potential. Even with a monstrous cheat skill like Megiddo Infernus, it is highly unlikely that he could prevail against Rimuru of the main storyline, who combines not only complete ultimate skills, but also an arsenal forged by the very best, countless allies, and exponential growth accumulated over decades of history. The future of the world of corrupted Rimuru. Pure speculation, but coherent. Let us remain within the realm of reasoned imagination based on canonical elements. In this dark scenario, Tempest no longer resembles the joyful and colorful nation we know. Shuna, the central figure who embodies gentleness, culture, and harmony, is gone. Without her, it is impossible to recreate that warm atmosphere, that pleasant daily life which once attracted so many people. Worse still, a Rimuru consumed by hatred toward humans would no longer possess that famous margin of benevolence. The atmosphere would become heavy, bloody, almost military and merciless. In such a climate, it is unlikely that Ramirez, the pixie demon lord who adores fun and colorful places, would choose to settle in Tempest as she does in the main story. Without her arrival, there is no labyrinth. Without the labyrinth, there is no massive reinforcement of national defense, no exponential increase in overall military power. And above all, without the labyrinth, there is no Zijin, the most powerful warrior of Tempest, the one who will become one of the most terrifying monsters in the entire universe, never emerges. This represents a colossal loss in terms of raw strength. Furthermore, in this world, the humans who treated monsters as slaves would be exterminated without mercy. Tempest would then become public enemy number 1 in the eyes of the Holy Empire of Ruberios. In the main story, Chloe eventually reconciles Hinata and Rimuru through her time loops. But here, with Rimuru having become a malevolent demon lord consumed by vengeance, killing Hinata would be conceivable. However, that would trigger total war against Luminous Valentine, the Queen of Nightmares. The situation would descend into a blood-soaked quagmire. Of course, with Veldora resurrected, he sides with Rimuru, making an immediate military defeat unlikely in the short term. But if Rimuru pushes things too far and truly threatens the balance of the world, Guy Crimson will intervene without hesitation. On Guy's side stand not only Misery and Rain, but also Velzard, the eldest of the true dragons, the Ice Dragon Queen. Faced with such a team, the forces of Dark Rimuru, even when heavily boosted, would appear overwhelmingly outmatched from the start. Another likely absence, the 3 demon girls, Testarossa, Ultima, and Carrera. In the main version, Diablo recruits them because Rimuru entrusts him with managing Pharmus and an enormous amount of administrative work. Rimuru, recognizing Diablo's exceptional merits in this conquest, personally offers him the right to choose the reward he desires. Diablo immediately seizes this opportunity and asks for permission to recruit old acquaintances to become his subordinates. Rimuru accepts without hesitation. It is a chain of events that is lighthearted, very much in line with Rimuru's relaxed and cool personality. By the way, I made a video about Diablo's return to the demon world to recruit the 3 primordial ladies. Go watch it afterward. In the alternative storyline, such a relaxed atmosphere no longer exists. Even if Diablo managed to bring them back, preparing hundreds of vessels for the 3 primordials and their subordinates would be nearly impossible. In the main story, these artificial bodies come from biocapsules manufactured thanks to the research conducted within Ramirez's labyrinth, and they incorporate spirit monster cores provided by Ramirez herself. Once again, without Ramirez and her labyrinth, everything collapses. Admittedly, the release of Veldora follows a course similar to the canonical storyline, so certain elements might coincidentally converge. But overall, the divergences are far too massive for the world to remain anywhere close to the original. The ultimate fate of Dark Rimuru. Let us assume that Milium and Guy consider this Rimuru a threat to the world's balance, which is highly likely if he embarks on human genocide driven purely by hatred. He would then become a global danger, and Guy, as the guardian of order, would be forced to eliminate him. But Milium would not stand by idly. We would most likely witness a titanic confrontation, Guy versus Milium versus Dark Rimuru, with allies on both sides. The world would plunge into absolute chaos. And that is not all. The Rosso family and the Eastern Empire would all see Rimuru as humanity's ultimate enemy. Even Gazelle Dwargo, who in the main story refuses to betray Rimuru as long as he retains his humanity, would become a declared adversary. Gazelle made it very clear, as long as Rimuru keeps a human heart, he will not withdraw his support. But if Rimuru becomes an enemy of humanity, the alliance shatters completely. Finally, just like in Chloe's time loops, the war against the Eastern Empire would arrive in a context of total disunity. Winning would be impossible under such conditions. Chloe would be forced to initiate yet another loop in an attempt to correct this catastrophe. This alternative scenario is cruel and merciless, yet it fits perfectly within the lore thanks to the multiple timelines observed by Chloe. It is a credible bad end, almost inevitable if Rimuru were to lose even one of his precious companions. His personality is such that total loss would mentally break him, pushing him straight into darkness. That is precisely what makes this bad end so realistic and so poignant. And amid all this darkness, one detail remains immutable and almost touching. No matter the timeline, Diablo always meets Rimuru, and his obsessive love and absolute devotion never waver. Truly, what an unhinged yet loyal stalker. Tensei Shitara Slime Data Ken is filled with fascinating spin-offs, and among the more recent ones there is precisely a work that reeks of alternate history, Clayman Revenge, or Clayman's Revenge, whose publication began quite some time ago. Seeing the official franchise actively explore parallel timelines, dark or distorted alternative routes, is a genuine gift for fans of alternate histories. It allows us to witness unseen facets of the characters, unexpected twists, and fuels the imagination endlessly. And let's talk about Mao Ryu. Beyond this ultra-dark alternative scenario, the game is packed with other wild events and content well worth checking out. For example, there is an event where Veldora is forced to wear a maid outfit. Yes, the Storm Dragon in a maid cafe outfit is canon in the game, as well as the appearance of completely unhinged characters like Shinsha, who proudly proclaims herself to be Rimuru's daughter, even though, yeah, we all know that's pure madness. These side stories and original characters bring a much-needed dose of humor and lightheartedness, especially after a scenario as dark as the one we just dissected. And the cherry on top, the game is fully voiced, with a level of production that clearly reflects passion and attention to detail. It is genuinely top tier for a mobile title. So, what did you think? We dove together into an alternative story that stands in stark contrast to the usual brightness of the main series. A Rimuru consumed by darkness, subordinates transformed into malevolent shadows, a once joyful nation turned into a bastion of ruthless vengeance. And yet there is a certain cold beauty, a dark and charismatic presence in this fallen demon lord and his corrupted faithful. It is undeniably cool in its own way, even if it is chilling. In the main story, everything often unfolds with an almost too perfect fluidity. Alliances are formed, miracles pile up, and Rimuru overcomes every trial with his legendary optimism and benevolence. But this alternative scenario brutally reminds us of an underlying truth. As a monster, even the most peaceful and just one, it only takes a single misstep, a prolonged absence, or an unbearable loss for everything to collapse. Without Rimuru to embody hope and restraint, Tempest becomes fragile and isolated, and the world of monsters can very quickly sink into absolute loneliness and mutual hatred. It is a harsh lesson, but one that makes the journey of the main Rimuru all the more precious. Thank you for following this long dive into the darkness of this alternative timeline. I hope you enjoyed it, that it made you think and perhaps even sent a chill down your spine. On this channel, we will continue to explore, analyze, and celebrate everything that makes Tensei Shitara Slime Ken so special. Theories, comparisons, and of course the canon moments that make us feel alive. If you're not subscribed yet, don't hesitate. Join us so you don't miss any future videos and can continue this adventure together. See you very soon in the next video. Take care of yourselves.